Welcome, guys, to Gothenburg Tech Week and our next event, building and launching a digital platform together with Wistrand Advokatbyrå. We are thrilled to have you here, and I am really looking forward to an interesting session. And Ebba, you will be moderating this, so I'm going to give over the stage to you.
Thank you so much, Elena. Welcome to building and launching a digital platform. And in this session, we will get some good advice on how to legally prepare your company for eventually, hopefully, an exit. And this is an event hosted by Wistrand. Tobias and Jeanette will give a presentation about the law firm in just a short bit. And we also have Adrian from Meitner, who will talk about his journey as an entrepreneur and the company that he built. My name is Ebba Josefsson Lindqvist. I am here to also represent AI Sweden, where I work. It's the National Center for AI. And I also represent an organization called Silicon Vikings, a networking organization bridging between the Silicon Valley and the Nordic countries. So I really look forward to this event. Great to have you guys online and also here live in the audience. So with that, I want to give the word to Adrian. Please come up on stage.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ebba, and nice to see everyone here, and as well as online. I'm here to talk about my journey as starting a business in a very young age till where I am at the moment, and building a edtech startup, creating a digital learning management system, a school platform. But let's jump back to the first day of my entrepreneurship career. I was 15 years old when I started my first company. I had no clue in business at all. I had never heard about entrepreneurship. I had no degree about it, and no degree in tech. I just accidentally found an idea that I thought this could be something. And the idea was very, very simple. I should import mobile chargers from China and sell in Sweden. Super, super simple. And a terrible idea, because everyone is doing that. So I started import with all my money I got. I imported a lot of mobile chargers. I still got them at home. And I put all my money at work. I sell some newspaper and so on at a very young age. And I took all my money and invested it on mobile chargers. And I went to the internet, created a website, and started selling online. The only issue was that I didn't find a single customer. So I burned all my money on nothing. So a year later, when I was 16 years old, the company collapsed, and I had to quit it all. So a normal kid would probably go to school and focus on getting better grades and go that way. I didn't. Good or unfortunately, I'm not sure yet. But however, I started the next one. I wanted some revenge feeling, and I wanted to do something else. So I started an IT consultant firm with students. But as well, again, I never learned IT. I didn't know how to develop. I didn't know graphic design. I didn't know anything in IT. But it was interesting. So I had to find a lot of people around me that know how to develop code, that could code and develop mobile apps, websites, graphic designs, and so on. So by finding nice people around me with a good skill in different areas, we managed to create something. So during my gymnasium time, I started an IT consultant firm. It's still established 5 years later and have ish 25 employees at the moment, part-time students. So in the last year of my studies at gymnasium, when I was 18, 19 years old, I founded or started looking into the school platforms, EdTech. So we founded Meitner, which is an all-in-one solution for schools, which will collect the administration part and the communication between parents, students, and teachers, and all administration work in a single platform, replacing 5 to 7 platforms at the moment the schools have today, and reducing the cost for every school and state with a lot of money. So we started doing that, and I mean, we had the insights of a student's work, but we didn't have the insights of a teacher or what a real administration is doing. What is the principal doing every day? So as well, we had to find people around us that know this. Our own teachers in other schools, and started doing this a lot of time. So I still don't know how to code. I have never coded a single line in my ever life, but I've started multiple IT companies. Today I'm 22 years old, and Maitner just launched in August, and we have raised so far 7.5 million crowns, Swedish crowns, and are currently raising 10 more. So we're building a digital startup in education technology, and we need always to find better people around us. We need to find people who know sales, we need to find developers, we need to find graphic designers. And a big part of this was also the law. We need to find assistance in how to handle GDPR. We're storing and managing a lot of personal data about kids, children, and students that is under my age. So we needed assistance in this part, so we reached out to Vistrand in Gothenburg and asked for assistance. We didn't know where to start. We didn't know what to ask for. What kind of papers or material are we in need of? So we reached out and was completely honest and said, we have no clue. I was 19 by the time and said, I have no clue what GDPR is. I just know that it's coming. This was in 2018. So in April 2018, 1 month before it was inactive. So we reached out. And what I've learned in this moment is if you reach out and say, completely honest, that we need assistance, we need help in this, you will get the help. The worst thing you can do as an entrepreneur is probably to say, I can do everything by myself, because you can't. So we reached out to Vistrand and got a lot of help, and thereby the journey started. So we will talk about, during this event, some of the parts in building a startup and technology platform without personally knowing how to code, how to build a platform, and don't know any entrepreneurship as well. Because none of my parents had done business before. None of my friends have. So it was a completely new area for me. But thanks to Vistrand, a lot of good employees, and a lot of advisory boards and investors, we managed to build something and scale it up, which we will continue doing. So thanks for me by the time, and welcome up Vistrand.
So hi everybody, and hi to the ones online. So my name is Jeanette Jönsson.
And my name is Tobias Bratt.
And as Adrian introduces, we are two lawyers working at Vistrand Advokatbyrå in Gothenburg. And Vistrand Law Firm is one of Sweden's premier law firm and a full-service law firm. And we have offices in both Gothenburg and Stockholm. Being a full-service law firm means that we advise our clients in matters from major transactions to dispute resolutions. Both me and Tobias are working with intellectual property law, data protection law, and general commercial law, including corporate legislation and so on. So on a daily basis, we actually do advise clients like Maitner and Adrian and helping them building their companies. And to a short introduction then to the panel discussion that we will have later on, we will just give you a summary of some of the legal issues that a startup and a tech startup building a digital platform will actually then come across when doing their business. So Tobias, you will start giving us an introduction to corporate governance and preparations for an exit.
Yeah, thank you. As Jeanette said, we will give a brief introduction to what can be important to know when setting up your business. And one common question when starting up your business is what type of business entity you should run your business in. And we have various alternatives here. The most common one is limited liability companies, which is aktiebolag in Swedish. The thing with aktiebolag is that you have a clear distinction between the liability of the company and the shareholders' liability. And you need to have a capital contribution to the company made by the shareholder or the shareholders. So you can, in some instances, be personally liable for what you do in the company. For instance, if you fail to pay your taxes. So that's an exception to the general rule that the liability of the company and the liability of the shareholders are separated. Another type of business entity is sole trader, which is an alternative if you want to set up your business by yourself and if you don't want to put in some money as a capital contribution. But if you choose this type of entity, then you will be personally liable for what happens in the company and what debts the company incur. And if you set up a limited liability company, then it could be good to consider whether or not you should enter into a shareholders agreement. And that is only something that becomes relevant if you are more than one shareholder, naturally. And the shareholders agreement is an agreement between the shareholders, obviously, and you can regulate certain matters relating to the business of the company and relating to the ownership of the shares in the company. Some examples could be setting out restrictions on how to sell, or how when it should be possible to sell the shares in the company. It could also come to restrictions on or you can set out obligations on when you should make capital contributions to the company, but also how to solve internal disputes whenever they occur, because they most usually do occur at some point along the journey if you are several shareholders. If you want to prepare for an exit, or if you want to attract external investors, it's very important that you keep your company documentation in good order. And this includes, amongst else, keeping track on your share register, which is aktiebok in Swedish. Also that you keep track on your share certificates, that you have all the company documentation in order. And it's also important that you keep track on the protocols that you draft within the operation of the company, that you keep track on the protocols with regards to the general meetings and board meetings that you hold in the company, so that there are like traceability to the decisions made in the company. And as Adrian briefly mentioned, it's also important that you have updated your internal documents and keep track on how you run your written operations in the company, and that you at an early stage draft important documentation such as privacy policies governing the processing of personal data within the company, and also that you draft and keep updated the terms of use if you aim your business towards consumers or business users. And as a last item, it's also important to have or to keep track on your agreements that you have with various suppliers or customers. It's a very good idea to keep all agreements in written form, as we have seen many clients and many entities on the market who gets into disputes over oral agreements, which are quite unnecessary. Should they have gone with the written agreements or acquired legal help at an early stage? So these were the items that's important for my section, and I will leave over to Jeanette. We'll talk more about something. She will talk more about protection of rights within the company.
Yes. Yeah. So as Adrian spoke about before, in a tech company, or as for Maitner in particular, the main value of the company will be protecting, or will be the source code of the platform, since that is the product or service that they are actually selling to its customers. It is hence essential that the company is actually prepared and protective of the intellectual property rights that are developed within the company, and that actually is the value of the company. And for a tech company or a company building a digital platform, we would say in summary that the most important intellectual property rights that you should be protective of is copyright, which is the intellectual property right protecting the source code of the platform. And for example, then also trademarks, which if you would register them would protect a company's logotype, a word or a slogan or similar that you want to connect to your company. In this session, we will, however, focus a bit more on the protection of the copyright, since this is important to the software of a digital platform. And as Adrian also was saying before, he has never coded a single bit in his life. He is therefore depending on its employees or consultants actually doing the work, not for him, but for the company, and actually producing and developing the platform and coding the source code. And if you have an employee in the company, that will be protected by law, that the ownership of the source code actually produced by such employee will be transferred automatically to the company. However, if you have a consultant, that is not the case. Then you have to have consultancy agreements actually regulating this kind of situation, and specifically then including language stating that the ownership of the developed source code is actually transferred to the company. And furthermore, it's very important to have control when you actually are launching your platform to customers, that you have customer agreements including clear and specific statements that the ownership to the source code will belong to and still continue to be the company's, and hence will not be transferred to the customers once they are invited to the platform or using the service. Furthermore, if we go on then a lot of companies nowadays don't build their source code from scratch. You need to use, or you want to use third-party source code or open source code to be more efficient, which is good, and it's very developing to using free source code. However, if you are developing your own code and using open source code or open source software in your own software when you develop the digital platform, you need to be aware of the licenses and the license terms of such open software, since this might include harmful regulation for your own software if you include it. For example, it might include a regulation stating that if you do include the open source code into your own software, you will lose the ownership of your own developed software, meaning that the company will not longer have the ownership of the software that you have developed for your platform. And that will be transferred to the licensor of the open source code. Another example of such a harmful term that could be included in such open source code licenses is that you are not allowed to commercialize your software if you include such one in your own software, stating that once you're ready to take on customers and to actually start selling and providing services for your platform, you're not allowed to do that because the terms of the open source code is limiting you to do that. So if you decide to base some of your developed source code or software on such free source code, you need to be aware of actually what the terms and conditions for the licensee of such open source software are. And the two remaining points here are sort of going into each other, because in regards of when you start selling your service or taking customers, making it available for your customers, you need to have clear customer agreements stating, as I said earlier, that the ownership of the IP will continue to belong to the company, because you don't want it to be exclusive. You want to reach out to all of your customers. But another point that is actually important to regulate in such an agreement, if you as a company will make any customer adaptations, making specific adaptations to a customers which involve that you change the source code, which we will then call results. And who will then have the ownership to the results? Will it belong to the customer, or will the company still have the ownership to such source code? And whatever case it is, it might need some license, maybe license for the customer to use such results, or a license for the company to continue to use such solution to other customers. So there are many parts of the intellectual property regulations that needs to be involved in such customer agreement. And as Adrian stated before as well, he's running a EdTech and actually processing a lot of personal data, which is very common nowadays, that the customer is actually putting in data into the platforms and putting in personal data. And such an agreement needs to be controlled and regulate the ownership of the customer data, and also in which case you are allowed to process personal data. And often you will need a data processing agreement. So these are just an example of legal issues that will actually become applicable for a tech company building its own digital platform. And yeah, now we were about to discuss it a bit more deeper and further together.
Adrian, please come up on stage. Do you guys need water? Or you think you'll be fine? I'll grab one. And you can share it. Okay, careful. I'm going to put it in.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. And first of all, Adrian, I must say it's like listening to a really senior entrepreneur when you walk us through your entrepreneurial trip. Are you a natural-born entrepreneur? Did
No.
you know it from the beginning?
No, I wouldn't say that.
What happened? What
happened?
What started it?
I think the very early stage was I had an idea. I didn't know what business was. I thought you needed some degree, you needed a lot of things to start a business. But I had an idea, and the teacher said, "Okay, go and do it." And before we could finish that sentence, I started Googling, and there it was, Googling, YouTubing, and etc. And yeah, a while later, I was starting a business. I didn't know what I'm doing. I didn't know any taxes. I didn't know anything about that. But we were starting to buy things and started trying to sell things as well. So there was the way.
So basically, that was maybe easier for you not to know all about these
Yeah,
obstacles
absolutely.
that are in the way. So maybe just fire away. And so, what was key for you to build this tech startup? Let's say Maitner now.
Yeah.
Without having a degree and without having developing skills.
I think the most important part is to find, as I mentioned earlier, find people around you that can handle those things. When you start a business, no matter if it's in tech or anything else, you always think you can do everything. You're doing the financial part, you're doing the sales, you're doing development, and the legal part as well, and you're doing basically everything and working 24/7. But in a very short time, you realize that they can't do everything of that. So you need to find people around you that can produce things, can sell things, can marketing, and also can the legal parts. So the most things I've learned is to find people around you, mentors, investors, advisory boards, etc.
Thank you. And so you were mentioning that you found Wistrand. How did you find Wistrand?
Google.
Google
No, I started
works.
Googling around on a lot of big law firms, especially in the data protection and the GDPR questions. Find a couple, and Wistrand was one of them, and reached out to some people and find a partner at Wistrand, Erik Ullberg, which I reached out to, and said that we had no clue in what we're doing, and we need a lot of help, but we don't know what we need the help for. So we started basically from scratch and had a first meeting and started discussing, and he told us, this is what you will need. And this is what you're going to ask for. Either if you go with Wistrand or someone else, this is what you will need. So we got a to-do list. This is all the agreements and paperwork we need to get done. And there it started. So my follow-up question was, how much will it cost? And from that way it was.
You forgot it. That's good. So you're touching on a point there where a lot of startups have a constraint, right? Money, capital. So when should you actually start to include legal help, for example?
It's a good question. It depends a lot on which kind of industry you're in. If you're in tech, you're storing a lot of personal data, it's very important to get started on it. But for us, we started quite early. Before we had any customers, before we launched the product, we started doing the legal parts. And now, a few years later, I'm very grateful for that, because if we would do it right now, we would have lost a lot of the clients we signed. We couldn't have signed, and it will cost much more money doing it now. So it's kind of an investment. The earlier you do it, the more money you save. It's the same as if you're going to digitalize a product or your branch or industry or company. If you start now in automation and you start digitalizing all the workflow, it will be much easier if you don't have any routines at the moment. So if we go from scratch with a paper and say, this is what we want to do and how we're going to do it in the legal ways, it's much easier to adapt and adjust from the feedback you get from the lawyers. So I'm very grateful we started that early, but there's no great answer in when you should do it, but the better the faster you can do it, the better. But it costs a lot of money, absolutely.
Let's be honest about that. But
Yeah, but it's
with all the,
I mean, it's development costs a lot of money, the sales cost money, and the legal parts cost money, and the financial cost money. Everything is requiring money at the moment. So what you can do is basically start from the very small part. Start with the biggest need you have and go from there. You can't invest in all the paperworks, even if it's good to have. You need to start with what's the exceptional important things that you really, really need. Like the employers agreement. So we have all the employees, and we know that everything they develop and all the consultant work are doing is owned by us. That's the most important part, because we can't have any investors investing in us if we don't have the paperwork done.
So I was going to ask that question to Jeanette, for example. So can you help the companies prioritize where to start? Maybe they can't get all that at one time, all the agreements that will eventually be needed. How can you help them understand where in their process they are?
Yeah, as Adrian said, I think it's a good start to meet up with a law firm and just sit down and have a talk and see where in the process of your building your company and where at which stage are you. If like when you were going to commercialize your platform, then maybe the priority was to get the customer agreements in order, to get in place the general terms and conditions for the use of the platform, to get in place all the personal data documentation needed in regards of the general data protection regulation, which everybody hates, but still very important to get it right from the first time. Also, since you are actually processing kids' data. And I think, as you said, that will depend on which company that you are and in which stage. And some corporate documentation, yeah, it's very important to have it correct and in order, because I think also that we have assisted you in some capital raising where the customers or the investors, sorry, has asked for documentation in regards of doing their own due diligence of your company before investing. And I think you found that it's very nice to just have it all in over and just send it over when it's time to actually raise some capital.
Yeah, exactly.
It's tidy and nice.
Yeah. But I mean, if you have one firm that has done everything, like we use Vistrand, you know all different parts. You don't just know one paperwork. You know them all. So it's very easier if you talk to an investor and say that we have everything done by Vistrand. It's very clear. They know that everything is done correctly then, and there's no misses. So if we would say we made all the data protection agreements by ourselves, they will see a really, really red flag, and they will start looking into it very deeply, and that will cost money for the investors. Or they will have to say to us, you need to redo them, so you need to take in more capital now to invest in new paperworks. But if we have a law firm that has done everything from the scratch, it's much easier to just get an acceptance of it.
And I will also say to the audience, in about 15 minutes or so, we will take in some questions from both online and here in the room. So you can think about some hard questions for the lawyers, maybe some good ones for Adrian as well. But meanwhile, why don't we dig a little bit deeper into this with having employees or having a consultant helping out with the development, for example, of the platform. You have both mentioned it a little bit before, but Tobias, perhaps, why is it critical to understand that there's a difference here?
Because there are different rules applying to the employees than it is to the consultants. If we take the employees for an example, if you choose to develop your platform via your employees, then you are more protected by law than you are if you let your consultants do the development work. But you still have to do your homework with regards to the agreements that you enter into, both with the employees and the consultants, because you have to ensure that all rights are transferred to your company and that there are no unclarities with regard to who actually owns the rights to what has been developed.
And then the effect of not owning the rights
could be crucial.
Yeah.
As Adrian said, it's something that the investors will dig deep in. And if they see some red flag that maybe some parts of the platform does not belong to the company, then they will maybe cut down the price that they are willing to put in or the capital contributions that they want to put in, and maybe don't do the purchase or the investment at all. So it's very important.
And then also an employee or a consultant can basically build their own competing platform.
Yeah, and it could lead to disputes and that you have to pay a lot of money to the employee or the consultant that makes the claim that he or she owns rights to the platform. So it's a huge risk, and we see that many companies are quite they don't take this serious at the start of the business. So this will become a problem later on when you come to the stage that Adrian is at now. Maybe they will realize that, oh, we didn't do this the right way from the beginning, and now it comes back to us. So it's very important to, if you can, to acquire legal help or to do your homework by yourself and ensure that all rights are actually transferred to the company.
And Adrian, so as the employer here, how easy is it to find someone who wants to develop? Is it most common for you to look for someone to employ or consultants?
We started by hiring employees only in the beginning, so we had 3 to 4 people, developers only. But then we needed to scale up. We took in some capital during the spring and needed a lot more employees very fast. And then was the fast way to get consultants, because you can get consultants work the next day, basically. Hiring people, probably most of you know that it takes a lot of time. And they have a current job they need to resign from. It will be 3 months from there before they can start, and so on. And if you need someone to start next week, which we had, so I think we employed or hired in 3 extra consultants in 1 week after a capital round was founded. And then we reach out to consultant firms. So now we have a combination. I think it's 50-50 at the moment.
All right. Yeah, and where do you see that go? I mean, do you prefer the one or the other? I mean, agile to
I think you need
consistency.
Yeah, I have a consultant firm, so I can't say consultant is bad. That would be a shame on me. But having the core team employed is my biggest recommendation, because you know they will stay for a longer time. If you have a consultant, you never know if the consultant firm put your people into another firm as well or so. So if you have more control, if you have a team that is employed. So I would say the core team employed, but it's very, very nice to have a consultant as well, because you can scale up and scale down fast. And what I mean by that is that you can resign or contract basically in a few weeks, maybe a month, if you have a consultant. If you have employees, it will take more time.
And you're touching upon something here that we also that you mentioned, like how to sort out the organization with having some maybe active shareholders working in the company, or having employees that want to own shares, for example. And Jeanette and Tobias, what are the most important parts to think of here, dividing between shareholders and employers, for example?
Yeah, it's most commonly is that you see that the founders actually are, as in your case, you being the main shareholder of the company, but there, as Tobias said before as well, that there could be multiple founders, or that you actually do take in some investors in a very early stage just to get it going. And as we said before, it's very important then to have your shareholder agreements in place in order for maybe the founder to keep control of the company, and also further on if you actually are raising capital and taking in more shareholders and giving up the control.
So what does a shareholder agreement really do?
Yeah, what does it do? No, it regulates the ownership of the company. How should it be run? How should resolutions be made in certain legal issues? How should you finance the company? Are you obliged to finance the company if it's going bankrupt? Or if you want to sell the company, if Adrian wants to make an exit, is he allowed to sell all of his shares, or does he need to sell it to the other shareholders beforehand? Right. So, and also taking care of issues such as non-competition and non-solicitation. If you take on investors, do you want them to take the knowledge and the know-how that they get from actually giving advice to the company that might be in the board to, and then go to another company and just keep doing the same, that you want to keep the know-how in-house or in the company that is actually developing them. So it has a lot of good effects on having that in place from start. And also, if you do take on investors, it's very good to have that one in place, because there might be no discussions then, that you just have to go along with what is already stated. And in regards of employees, then, if you want them to be shareholders or just employees, there are different kinds of initiative programs. Like, you can give out options, which will mean that the employee will be able to maybe in a couple of years actually do get shares in the company, but at the moment it's just a fictive option to receive it, and you have used that in your company as well.
Then you don't have to do the shareholders agreement with all the employees that have options. That's
No.
a later question.
Yeah, that will be a later question, but still a good initiative for the employees to keep doing good work for the company and still be involved, I would say.
Yeah,
A good monetary incentive, hopefully, if everything goes well with the company, right?
Yeah, and they will get motivated because you can never pay as much as high salary as a big company can when you start, because you don't have the money. So it's very simple. So if you can send out options or something else, it's very more likely that it stay and that it will work with you a long time.
Do you see that also as a kind of an argument or to actually attract young talent? Or we were discussing it's hard to find these developers, for example. That's actually something that sticks out in comparison to a normal salary.
Absolutely. I mean, when you're a startup, you never work 8 hours a day. You work 12 or 16, or that's up and down, but you work a lot more. And you need the core team and employees to do the same. Otherwise, it can't work. And it's very difficult to tell someone to work more than they should if they are not into the idea. And if they are into the idea and they believe in what you're doing, which is very nice, then they will do it by themselves. But you also want to find some way to reward them on this. So they see that if I put in 2 extra hours this week, I will get something back in return. And the options is a very, very good way of doing that in the long term.
And Jeanette and Tobias, right? There have been some discussions about options programs in Sweden for some time, but right now we actually have quite good possibilities to work with that, right?
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussions in revolving tax issues in regards of personal or employee options then. But yeah, we won't get into the details. No. But no, it's much better now and much more easy to use for a company and to offer it to its employees. That's correct, yeah.
There are ways to handle taxes.
Yeah, there are ways to handle taxes.
Yeah.
Really good. So talking about protecting rights, etc., we've touched upon the IP rights and using, for example, open source. If you're creating a platform, that's sometimes an easy option. There is already code out there that you want to use. Adrian, from your point of view, why would you use open source?
It's you should never invent the wheel once again, you talk about, and it's the same in the code. If someone invented what you call rich text input, I mean, if you have an input field and you can select, we want the underline, we want the bold size or reverse cursors, you want to use the same as everyone else, because building that will only make a lot of more bugs and problems. So you find very small parts that is already done that everyone is using. You save a lot of times by using this. So you will never build a project from the scratch without using any open source ways today on. But then in different subjects you use more or less. We use quite less of the open source stuff because there are very few players in this market that we can use open source things from. So we're building a lot of things by ourselves, but of course there are some open source stuff as well.
So it sounds like you have a bit of a mix.
Yeah, you always need a mix
of code, right? So, Tobias, what is then really important to keep in mind when you want to use an open source code and kind of integrate it in your own code, basically?
It's important, as Jeanette said earlier, it's important to read the license terms, of course, either by yourself or by contracting a lawyer, because there can be restrictions in how you can use the results of which you have used the open source. So if you want to create a platform using open source and there are restrictions in the license terms with regard to the use of the open source, then it could have effects on your possibility to operate your platform. So it's very important to read the license terms carefully and make sure that you can use the platform in the way that you want, making use of the open source in question.
So open source doesn't mean that it's open and free to use.
No, exactly, because there can be various restrictions such as prohibition to use it commercially. It could also have duties to like contribute with something that you have created based on the open source. So you give back to the community of which you have borrowed the open source. So there are some restrictions that you need to be aware of. So that's why it's very important to read the terms and, if possible, then to hire some help.
And Jeanette, so if there is a restriction for commercial use, for example, what does that mean? What kind of implications does it get to your platform or your code?
Yeah, in the worst case scenario, that would mean that you are not actually allowed to put out the platform to be used by customers. That you are not allowed to make money on the source code that you actually have developed because you have involved the open source soft code in your own developed code then. Which will, harm your business if that's your idea to put out the digital platform. So, and also it could be mentioned that it's important in regards of what the customers are actually putting in data and stuff in the platform, because if they are involved in it, they might be given access and or due to the legal terms. It might not be that usually anymore that it involves these types of harmful terms. But there could be, and it's very important that you do actually have control of what you actually use. And a lot of customers, when they actually start using the product as well, will maybe ask the question or want it in the agreement that you are in control of the intellectual properties that you have developed, that you have the ownership, and because otherwise the customer will have a risk that someday you won't be operating the service anymore. So you must give a guarantee that, we have the ownership to this. So it's important in both ways, both to keep your ownership and also to give guarantees to your customers earlier on.
And in this terms of protecting, so if you have your own source code, what kind of license or how do you want to protect your own code? Or do you actually want to put it open source?
If you develop your source code by yourself and you enter into customer agreements, for example, and you make certain customer adaptations, as Jeanette mentioned also, then you need to ensure that the customer agreements include writing saying that the ownership to the results or the customer adaptations is transferred to your company. So that the customers cannot make claims saying that these rights actually belong to us, to these specific adaptations, because you want to be able to use these adaptations in other customer cases as well. So it's very important to address this question in terms of agreement.
And then we're talking about the data. We've mentioned GDPR, but first of all, if you want to use your customers' data, how for developing your platform, for example, let's say you train your algorithms on the data that the customer is putting in there, what's most important to think about here?
From the beginning you might not be allowed to do that if you do not include such language in the customer agreement, because that data belongs to the customer and is the sole property of the customer. So if you want to do that and train your AI robot or something, or use it to maybe develop the platform in any other way, statistics or anything, you need to have a license to do that from the customer, actually stating that you are allowed to use this further on or during the term of the agreement, or just to use it to develop the platform, because otherwise you won't, it will be an infringement into their ownership if you would do that without the allowance to do so. And that will be important as well if you have if you process personal data. then you will have to think about making it anonymous before using it, because you are not allowed to maybe process the personal data in any other way than providing the services. So you're not allowed to use the personal data to develop your own software. Then you have to have a language stating that, yeah, we will use it, but however, it will be anonymized and not personal data in the meaning of law anymore. So yeah, it's a bit tricky, but they need to be in place in order for you to use the customer's data or to use personal data included in such platform. Yeah.
So this kind of sounds a little bit complicated, right? And especially if you have a platform where tons of people are entering in. So, but can you basically, so I understand that the text needs to be specific, but can you use some kind of click wrap functions, or how do you have an interface that is still nice? And I'm kind of directing this question to you, Adrian. Like, maybe you can sign an agreement with every customer, every person at least using the platform. How are you guys thinking about this?
I can't answer for the legal part. That's
No,
up
you
to
don't have to. It's their job.
But yeah, but if you look, it's always, if you talk about the legal part of the security, IT security as well, in the comparison to the user experience, it's a very important balance over there. Because if you use too much security, it will become a lot of difficult to use the platform. If you only focus on the UX, you won't have the security. Because I mean, the login screen, no one likes the login screen. Why do I have to log in all the time? So from the UX part, you want to skip the login screen and just dive right into it. But from the security side, you need the login screen. So you need to find a good balance in this. You don't want pop-ups to say, I confirm, I want to share my data, etc., with all these pop-ups. You want to use it as storage. Let's say I confirm. The user confirm now that it's fine to use. Then you want to have the right amount of time, which is a legal question, before the pop-up needs to be shown again. Maybe you don't need to show it every time you log in, but maybe you need to show it once a month or once a week, etc. But a good way in, like, we track the personal data could be in, we have a big platform and we want to see where is the teacher operating most, in which sections. Are they creating more tasks or more plannings for the students at the moment, or are they taking the attendance, and which times? So we basically can track their mouses and how they're clicking in the platform and where they spend most of the time. So we can become a better platform. And that's a very important part in it as well.
Thanks. So we'll see if we actually do have some questions from the audience. Secret paper slipped in here. So I'll take one of these and then raise your hand if you want to ask something. So for Maitner, what was your legal hurdles when growing your company? And what legal challenges are you facing forward? Maybe you're happily unaware of those. But what was the legal hurdles? When it was
I think the most things that is hurting is when you have, let's say, the customer contract that we have. We go to a school and say this is the contract. Then every school has their inputs. They want to change some things in this contract because no, we didn't use to sign this. We had this in our other platform, etc. So you need to adapt the agreement. Not every time, but a lot of times. And you can't have multiple different types of agreements because you would never know.
Contract management is
You can't
going
handle
crazy, and you have to hire 2 people just to do that.
Exactly, and you can't do it as a startup. So you need to have some template basically that is the same for everyone. But that is a really big issue all the time. How much are you going to adapt the agreement or not?
Thanks. And then to Wistrand, what is the biggest legal mistake companies or startups make? Not contacting you?
In general, it's not keeping track on their like internal matters, meaning documentation, relationships with customers, relationships with employees and consultants. It's very primitive in the way that they usually don't enter into written agreements and those kinds of things. If you develop yourself into a great company, then it will be those things that will become visible on a later stage where investors are coming into the picture. So I would say that that's the main problem that they encounter later on in their journey.
Yeah, and maybe we should, in addition, it could be said that the question that we have arisen quite a lot today, just keeping or protecting your IP, including that language in consultancy agreements or in employment agreements. I would say that if we're having like a transaction and representing a buyer of a tech company, that will be almost 99% of the times the IP ownership will be unclear. And you have to like sort that out and do multiple documentations in connection to the transaction to often secure the ownership of the IP in the company. So that's a question that we see quite a lot in just transactions and when you're doing an exit and selling your company.
And especially in companies who have grown in quite fast speed. They haven't really been that mature in their journey, so that's a huge problem for them. But we usually solve it by drafting and executing various documents so that you can track the rights to the company, or that you can ensure that the rights are actually transferred to the company.
All right, thanks. We had a question from the audience. I think so. I might repeat the question.
Okay. It's a long question.
Do we have a mic? Maybe we can pass one of the mics.
Yeah.
Tobias, thank you. Long question with a short answer.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thanks for very, very good presentations. Very easy to get them and understand them. And I'm not that smart, you know. I was going to ask you a very stupid question. You mentioned it around it, but I'm going to concrete it and by saying this, that if my colleagues and I produce a digital platform in-house, and then we say that we wanted this to be used by all technology transfer centers within Europe's borders. Is that some kind of open source, or how do we do that to say that we don't want to make contracts with every part that's going to use this? It's an old segment, it's an old area that's going to be using this. And are we still owner of the situation and the digital platform?
Yeah, that depends on is it going to be a free service, or how are you?
Yes, it's a free service because we want people to be free to create and cooperate with us and don't have strict areas all the time.
Yeah, but
I think you understand what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, you're able to still maintain the ownership of the source code that you have developed. Then there might be a question if all the users will be developing software on the main or the basis of the software. That might be an issue. But you can still have terms stating that you will remain the ownership to the source code. Yeah.
Of course, we will turn to you to get some help. But I mean, the principle must be known, so we know what we're doing.
Yeah, but you should have it in license terms or something, because otherwise they might take the source code and then develop something on it if you do not protect it. Because it's just a copyright, it's not a registered right. Copyright is it's just protected by law as it is.
It can be called open source.
Yeah, it can be called open source. I would say it's open. It's either call it open source or you call it third party. And yeah, I don't know exactly the legal terms of the difference, but for open source, for me as more of the IT part, is something that's free of charge. Everyone is working on it, and you have it on GitHub or something, and people are committing and are sharing something into it, and you have a community working on it. If you are the company working on a platform yourself and sharing that to different parties, then I would say, and if you are paid to do it, I would say it's a third-party platform that you offer. But if you have it more open source, people can use it in not all the matters, but in restricted areas, it will be an open source.
Thank you for that good question. And thank you for the good answers. And before we wrap up, one last question. Some main points of when you want to do an exit, so basically sell your company, what are the main things that you need to keep in mind? And we'll start from the legal perspective, and then Adrian, you can finish off with the entrepreneurial side of selling your baby.
So the main things, where should I start really? The journey starts when you initiate your business, basically. So, but it's very important that you prepare yourself for letting people make a due diligence of your company, and that's
So review it.
Yeah, of
basically.
course. Yeah,
Thoroughly.
That's not maybe a term that's well known to everyone, but if you want to sell your company or take in investments, you usually let the investors or the buyers make a review of your company, meaning the documentation and issues that are relevant for the operation of the company. So you need to prepare yourself in quite early, so that you avoid having difficult questions raised early in the stage. And so you can also persuade the buyer and the investors that you are a company of quality, and that you can like support your price, the price of the, either if you are selling the company or the price that the investors are putting in.
Something that you want to add on to that, Jeanette?
Oh,
Most
that's a
important
good
things
question.
for an exit.
No, but I agree with Tobias, and I think that another thing that we also had touched before is that you actually are in agreement with your co-owners, that you have talked about this before, and that you are in a line that you do want to sell this company, and in that case, a shareholders agreement might help.
Thank you. And Adrian, so from
the
the entrepreneurial side of...
Yeah, but the shareholders agreement is super, super important. You need to be in track of how can you sell the company. I mean, a good example could be, let's say I own a majority of these shares at the moment, but I don't own all of it. So if I would say I want to sell everything, we have a buyer, I want to sell it, but I don't have 100% of the shares, then you need to be regulated. How are you gonna split it? I think I don't know the standard policy, but I think it's like 90% or something, and you have something called drag along. So let's say that a small part that has 1% of the shares can't stop the entire sales process. And this is really important, because you can always have someone say, no, I don't want to sell. I want to keep doing this, and the rest of 99% of the business want to sell. If they can't sell because someone is blocking the sales process, it will be very complicated. So I think, the shareholders agreement is super important to keep track of for the investors and for your co-founders if you have those, but also keeping track of all the paperwork. So if you have correct agreements with every employee you had from the first day till the end, it's much easier to show it up, and the due diligence process or the review of the company will be much faster and save a lot of money for both parts.
Thank you so much. It'll be great to follow your journey with this Maitner. See how you can take maybe the world with Storm, starting with Sweden.
Yeah, hope so.
Thank you so much for the good presentation. And Wistrand, thank you so much. You guys will be staying here for a little bit if you want to ask some questions for you who are here in the room. And we also want to say thank you so much for the attendees who were online. And a special thank you, of course, to Gothenburg Tech Week.